Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for being here with us this morning. Welcome to our latest webcast at the Center for Leadership with the amazing Carol Lempert. We're going to get started here
Hello.
in just a minute here as folks come into the room and start populating the room. Thank you for being here with us today. And boy, those numbers shot up fast. Awesome. I have a quick question for you all who are just coming on, for everybody here. If you can just type in the chat, if this is, I'd be curious to know, we just want to get a sense of you all. Is this your first time that you have been to a Center for Leadership event, virtual or in person? Or is this, have you attended before? So let us know if this is your first time, your second time, your third time, or if you can't even count. I know that we have a lot of people who they can't even count. So awesome. Look at all those first timers.
A lot of first timers. Oh, yeah, and I can't even count.
Great. I've been to a bunch and I see some names popping up that look familiar. So thank you for those of you who we have some folks who are just awesome and they say, hey, well, I'm going to show up whatever is going on today. So thank you to all of you. And it's great. Welcome if this is your first time. We've been running these. We started running these webcasts as a free way for us to spread what we do as far and as wide as possible. We in about May of last year wanted to keep connecting with the folks that we engage with and even seek out new folks. And we recognize that we have a lot of people within our orbit, a lot of the experts within our orbit. We are geeks about leadership and leading, and we wanted to try and give as much away of that as we could. And so we've been engaging in dialogues with folks over the last now 7-8 months who are within our orbit, who are facilitators for us, who are coaches for us, who work with us, and just trying to solidify and give away and engage in a conversation where they can share some of their insight and perspective and give it away to our audience. And so we are glad that you are here today. And I guarantee, I have a money back guarantee this morning that you will get some value out of today, that you will learn some things that will help you to own the room and the Zoom. So Carol, our fantastic guest, welcome and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. I'm quite flattered to have been invited.
Carol Lempert is a speaker, an in-person and now virtual speaker. She's also a performance coach. She has been working with the Center for Leadership with us at the Center for Leadership in a number of our programs for probably about 7 years, I think, now, 6 years. Yeah. And we seek out the very best, and we're not afraid to partner with people outside of our university who are fantastic. And so that has been the origin of our work with Carol. She can tell us a little bit about, we're going to get into a little bit about her background, but she is a professional actor by training and helps to leverage that, not just exclusively, but helps to leverage that in the context of leading and at work. And at first, we'll get into some questions surrounding this, because at first that transition and translation isn't necessarily obvious. And I'm excited to get into that here in a few moments. But it's been fantastic to see how she delivers and adds value and a new perspective for folks in our programs and now here today.
Thank you so much, Nathan. So I believe quite fiercely that the skills that actors use to have great stage presence and now screen presence, since everybody's living in the box, can translate for leaders and executives for their leadership presence and their executive presence. And I know we'll take a deper dive into that, as you ask me questions and the conversation continues. In terms of, go ahead.
What do you say to folks and so I want to take the mind of a skeptic who's saying, I'm going to show up here today, but I'm a little bit skeptical. How do and we can dig into aspects of this later, but am I being fake? I mean, so if I think about acting at work, shouldn't I be authentic? So just as a deep dive for folks who may be on a skeptical, how is this relevant and are we a threat to their authenticity?
Okay, so I think that that is a really important question. It's a great one to start with. Human beings play various roles in their life. So the version that I am if I go to synagogue or church is different than the version that I am if I'm with my husband and we're having a romantically charged moment, is different than the version that I am with my 3-year-old child when I'm toilet training them. So as human beings, we have different facets to us, like facets of a diamond. And each one of those roles that we play, I'm a neighbor, I'm a taxpayer, I personally happen to be a teacher and a trainer, you happen to be running a program, you're a parent, et cetera, et cetera. It is very human to play all of those different roles. And so actors play roles for a living. So we step into being someone that we're not. But when we step into being someone that we're not, what we're using is the part of us that might behave that way if we were in the given circumstances. So for leaders at work, same thing. As a leader, we play all kinds of different roles. Sometimes we're the coach and we're coaching people. Sometimes we have to be the captain of the ship and say, no, this is what we're doing, no conversation because it's urgent. We've just lived through that in the pandemic. Many, many leaders had to just make decisions quickly last March, April, and May about what we were going to do. Not a lot of conversation because it was a crisis situation. Sometimes as a leader, you're the conceiver, you have the vision or the idea, and you have to paint a picture of the future. So even my voice went up, my gestures went up. If I'm stepping into being the conceiver, I'm going to show up maybe with this kind of energy. If I'm going to be the coach, I might have a more reassuring tone and a slower kind of pace. And all of that is who you authentically are when you are stepping into each of those roles, which I think at the university you refer to as situational leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I think that's a great segue. And there were a lot of themes that are going to come up, I think, later in the context of our conversation. I want to take a moment and put up a Menti poll. I want to ask the audience and the participants here today a couple of questions. One of which we're very curious about. The next one we're going to use as feedstock for later.
Okay.
For later in our discussion here today. So for those of you who are not familiar with Menti, it's really simple. If you're on a desktop, go to menti, MENTI.com and type in the code. It'll ask for a code. If you're on a phone, same thing, MENTI.com, 1543269. That number is in the chat. It's also on the screen here now. So menti.com, and Menti with an I. And just type in, don't worry, you won't get spammed. You're not signing up for anything. 1543269. Let us know. The question for you is, what has been the most challenging part of the pandemic to you personally? Was it the beginning in the first couple months? Is it been the middle? And is it now?
Oh, this is fascinating.
This is really fascinating. Yeah.
Personally, I would say for me, it was the beginning. I was just a bit, what's going on? Do I have work? That was true for me for sure.
When there was all of this uncertainty, right? There was just, like, what does this mean? We're in a bit of a rhythm now, aren't we? But we're in a rhythm, but it also seems like it's not going to end, right? I think that's one of the frustrations now. I mean, and we know it's coming to an end, but enough already, right?
Yeah.
This is really interesting.
Also, we're like less than 2 weeks away, at least here in New York. The world shut down on March the 12th. When I say the world shut down, that's when Broadway shut down. So that's my marker. But, on March the 12th is when kind of hashtag work from home started to happen for many, many people. So we're on the heels of that 1-year anniversary. So it's interesting what happens when people face an anniversary. That these numbers about now, 38 people are saying now. That's fascinating to me to see.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you to the 131 of you who participated in this poll. That's great. And it looks like it's more evenly spread than I would have thought, with a preponderance of folks saying that the first part maybe was a little bit more challenging, but it's certainly, this has been a challenge for all people in different kinds of ways, hasn't it? I want to jump to the next poll. Question. So there's going to be another question. This will pop up on your screen, so you don't have to enter in any new code. It should be right there. This is an open-ended question. If you can shortly, or you don't have to type a long essay here, but when you work from home, how do you mentally prepare to start your workday? how do you mentally prepare to start your work day when you work from home?
That's a great question. I'd be very curious to see what people say.
We are hiding, just so you know, once you've typed in the results, we are hiding the results now. We're
Ooh.
going to loop back to this question a little bit later on during our discussion. So if you don't see your answer pop up, it will pop up later when we share what this looks like. And I think there's some discussion that might help you get some ideas around how you can approach your day a little bit differently, and how one small adjustment might actually help you. We're here to add value as much as we
Well,
can.
it's interesting because our title today is how to own the room and the Zoom. So you've just done a technique that we can explicitly point out to people. You have created some suspense. We're going to find out the results of these a little bit later. So we've hooked people's attention to want to tune in and see what that's going to be. So that's a good one.
Right, indeed. So this is so not only are we curious about this and are going to use it, but we wanted to demonstrate this technique. For those of you who don't use Menti, of course, there's other things as well. We found it to work very well in our programs because it has a little bit more of a robust, it's more robust than the Zoom function. For those of you who are using Zoom and Teams, I'm not as well versed on Teams, but it's a nice way to integrate, and it integrates and shows up very well if you plan the right kinds of questions and think about how you're going to use it. It's a way to engage audience. And we see there's 130 people there are 200, and I don't know if you all can see the numbers. There are 250 people here with us today. Awesome. Thank you for being here. That's fantastic. And 130 of you have already finished typing in, and some of you. So in a large audience like this, to have over a 50% participation rate to answer these questions, we do want to know, but it also changes the extent to which you engage with us, because we could just sit here and talk, but now you're jumping in, and we've been very intentional in thinking, what are the questions, and then how are we going to use to discuss that? And Carol, it's a great way to think of this as a suspense. I'd never, I'm picking up the dramaturgical lingo. So, okay, we will come back to that. Thank you. You can feel free to keep answering here. I want to jump into a few. Let's get into if we can, Carol. Can you tell us? And I want to get into your background a little bit, but let's jump into a few Zoom techniques that you see people get wrong, and what might they do to get those right, and or maybe not things they're doing wrong, but how might they amplify how they come across in their presence in the context of this little box that we're in.
Yes, indeed. Good question. So here's what happened. Last March, when most of the world said you have to work from home now if you had this kind of an office job, as opposed to being an essential worker, which we are grateful if you are one of those people. But for those of us that are working from home and working in the Teams box or the Zooms box or Blue Jeans or WebEx or whatever your company invested in to use, nobody said to you, guess what? You are now broadcasting from your own personal television studio. Right now, you are watching Carol Lempert TV, and at the same time, you're simultaneously watching FIU TV starring Nathan. Nobody sent that memo. And so many of us just turned on our cameras from our laptops and started working. And then maybe you saw an article on LinkedIn that said, oh, go get a light. That's probably a good idea. And maybe invest in a camera. That's probably a good idea. These are all of the things that you need to look good on camera. And the reason that that is so important is that we all grew up watching screens. We know what good TV looks like. We know what good film looks like. So if I'm going to be looking at my boss or my colleague on a screen, I know what good looks like, and I know what passable looks like. And so here we are, almost a year in. The expectations about what good looks like has risen because more and more people have gotten really good at it. So specifically, I was on a call just 2 days ago, and of the 20 people, 20 participants in a workshop that I was training, about 18 of them looked pretty good in their box, but there was still about 15% of the people that didn't have light shining on their face, and they were sitting with a window behind them with the window shade up. So when sunshine comes in behind you, it creates a glare on the screen, and then your own face is quite dark. And it's like those awful police procedural programs where, we're hiding the criminal in the dark because we don't really want to see who they are to give them some anonymity. People are still looking like that on screen. People are working from home on their laptops, and they're using their laptop camera as the camera to speak to people. Because the laptop is lower on the desk, and when you open the laptop, the camera is lower on the desk, the angle that the camera reaches you is up this way. So we're looking at you up your nose. Exactly, just like that, Nathan. Not your most attractive angle. Nicole Kidman, a very beautiful woman, that is not her most attractive angle. So really giving thought to what is my viewer seeing and what are the things that I can put into place. So lighting really important, the angle of the camera really important. But in addition to that, and this goes to one of the dimensions of presence that we'll probably get into in more detail later, part of your presence is what do people see when they look at you? So what do they see when they look at you is you. Are you comfortable in your own skin? Are you projecting some enthusiasm and some confidence? But also in this Zoom world or Teams world or Blue Jeans world, whatever world you're in the box, is that you have an understanding that people are viewing you in the box, and that unlike television, the box is interactive. So today already, we have invited people to chat, to type into the chat box. So one way of asking people to type into the chat box is, can you type into the chat box and let us know if you're a first-time viewer? Another way to do it, to leverage the fact that you know how people are looking on you, is to do it like this. So everybody open up the chat box. That's the bubble that's right in the middle of your screen, right down there. So I'm pointing and I'm directing people exactly where they should be looking in this world of the screen that they are also seeing me in. And you give it as explicit direction. So everybody open up the chat box. And now the question that I'd like you to answer is, and you tell them what the question is, and we'll give everybody 30 seconds or so to do that. And then I'll read out some of the replies. So in the world of Zoom, we need to, in this world of the box that we're in, being more explicit will get more engagement. And so that's another technique that I've been teaching to people over the last couple of months.
So can you talk a little bit more about this directionality and what that, and sort of where, because that, that is, I think, fantastic and comes from a world that, that folks like us we don't think about.
Right. So if you look at what we're on Zoom right now, so I'll use Zoom as the proxy, but if at work you're on Teams, you'll have to get to know where the functionality of Teams is. So on Zoom, for example, you can hide yourself from yourself, which I recommend that people do, because in the before times, when we would walk into a meeting room, nobody is walking into a meeting room with a mirror in front of them going, how's my hair before, oh, hi, everybody, and I'm looking at myself. And in this remote world, the screen automatically comes up. I can see myself. I can also see you. If I can see myself, it means that part of my own brain is engaged with looking at myself. How am I looking today? Which means that is part of your brain that is not mentally engaged with what's going on in the meeting. And it can add a little bit of self-consciousness to how you're actually showing up in the meeting as well, which then can diminish your presence on the meeting. So, for example, in Zoom, if we were all in a meeting together, in this case, we're broadcasting as a webinar, so people can't do this. Up in the top right, so I'm pointing up in the top right corner, it says view. And if you click on view, you can put yourself in gallery view or speaker view. So I invite everybody to go into gallery view. And so now you can see.
Okay, let's all do it right now.
So potentially people would do that now. And then I would say in the upper right corner of your own video tile, move your mouse in front of your own video tile. There'll be 3 little dots. Click on those dots and there'll be a drop-down menu. So I'm doing all of these gestures. I'm pointing where it is. I'm showing that there's the dots. I'm indicating that there's a drop-down. Halfway in the drop-down is an option that says hide self-view. So you can click on hide self-view. And the benefit of that is that it gets you a little bit more real estate on your screen because your own video tile goes away. So all the other video tiles get a little bit bigger and the screens have a limited amount of space. So if you can make everybody else's space bigger, that's nice for you to see everybody else's space. And then it hides that mental distraction of you looking at yourself the entire time. So getting to know where is all the functionality on the screen. If I would say to you right now, so if anybody is in agreement with what we're talking about, give me a thumbs up. You can either show me your real thumb or you can show me your virtual thumb. So just go down into the lower right-hand corner of the screen. You'll see where it says reactions, and then you can click on the reaction and then the reaction bubble will come up. So get to know where everything is on the screen, and then you can point to stuff and ask people to do those things.
And do I need to point, if I point this way, does it show up or is it inverse?
So point the way you just pointed.
Yep.
And which way do you think you're pointing now?
Up, I think, so as I see it, and so this is why I wanted to ask this. I
Yes,
see it as up. I see it as up and to the left. I am pointing I'm pointing up and to the left. However,
the viewer will see that up and to the right, unless there is a setting on Zoom that you can pick that you want to be in mirror view or not mirror view. So the answer to the question depends on whether or not you are in mirror view or not in mirror view. If you are not in mirror view, when you point to I'm pointing to the left, but you're seeing it to the right. If we were the other way, then you would see what I was doing. So that depends on the setting of your Zoom.
Yep. So, and I see Laura put mirror your image in there. That's great. Thank you for putting that, that in the chat as well. Can we talk a little bit around where and how we can look so that we're not, now let me try and demonstrate this. I often find myself, you know, and sometimes I use this as a strategy. I mean, if you're in a large group where I am not, I'm in listening mode. And I don't need to be, you know, so let me ask this as a two-part question. So one is, what are the limits of when we should care about this and when we shouldn't? Because we're not always looking to command a room or to kind of come across. Sometimes we're passively listening and we don't really need to be on and super present. We just need to be on. Some of these meetings we need to be on just kind of to monitor, to make sure there's nothing really important that's being said. So is the bar that we're talking about here, are we talking about that we need to be doing this in all the Zoom meetings we're on? Because that's exhausting.
Yeah, it can be exhausting. So I think that the first parameter is, are you a presenter or are you an attendee? If you are an attendee, the pressure of how you're showing up is a little bit less. The second thing is, if you are a presenter and you are sharing presenter responsibility with some other presenters. So in this meeting, for example, there are two of us and we are sharing presenter responsibilities. You speak and I speak, but everybody else is looking at us. We need to be on and carrying the energy of the meeting. If either one of us is lacking and starts to look a little bit bored, our viewers will start to think, well, this is not such an interesting Zoomcast. I'm going to go watch something else. So in this kind of world, we have to hold it. So that's the first parameter. How much will the viewers be looking at me? If I'm the presenter, a lot of the time. If I'm not the presenter, not much of the time. If I'm just a participant, not at all. Some people choose, when they are just participants, not even to turn their cameras on at all. Now, it depends on the culture in which you work, whether that is helpful from a presence perspective, as opposed to from it's 4 o'clock, I've been on Zoom all day and I'm exhausted perspective. If it is a team meeting with 9 of your colleagues who you meet every single day and you've known them for 15 years and everybody knows what you look like and you all know what they all look like, if you explicitly say, I'm Zoomed out of my mind, I'm turning off my camera, that does not diminish your presence. If you don't explicitly say that and you show up and your camera's not on, what you're signaling to people is, I don't care that much about you. I don't want to be seen today, but I don't want to even say that I don't want to be seen today. And as soon as one person does that, everybody does that. And then the burden of the presenter person is that much more, because we haven't explicitly talked about what is the expectation for this hour of time that we are about to spend together.
That's
yeah, go ahead.
No, that's really great. And I think it gets to something in our planning call, as we were talking about this, this idea that not every meeting should be on Zoom. You know, yes. It helps a lot when I take my some of my meetings. Someone will say, what's our preference? Well, if it's I don't need to see them, it helps, because then I can be on a phone and walk around.
Yes.
And I can walk outside. I don't have to be there. So just to be clear, we are not saying that this is not about trying to Zoom yourself out, or that Zoom is the ultimate way, but that some of our meetings need to occur in the context of Zoom. And but we need to turn it off sometimes. And I think that's really important.
I want to pick up the theme of one of our viewers just typed something in, a gentleman named Jim Ewing. It says, the answer to all project management questions is it depends. And so what I'll scaffold on top of that is not just project management. It depends is often the answer to a question. But then the first question one should ask themselves is, what is my goal for this meeting?
Absolutely.
And once I know what my goal for the meeting is, then I can decide cameras on appropriate, cameras not on appropriate, share my screen appropriate, not share my screen appropriate, ask people to type into chat appropriate, not have them type into chat appropriate. So first we have to decide what the goal is of this next hour of our life. And then all of those other things fall into play.
And Carol, that sounds like an obvious question that most people, when they're thinking about a meeting, feel like, oh, well, that's obvious, but it's not.
Right.
In other words, I'd like to suggest that's something that is really important and simple, but very rarely done, and significantly changes how you approach the whole meeting. And I see when I ask leaders this as they're, what's your goal with this communication, or what do you want people to feel? What do you want them to understand? They often can't answer, or it sharpens sort of the purpose and focus of what they're doing. So obviously, we should have very few meetings without clear agendas as well.
Yes.
But before we get too far on this, it's driving me nuts because I've been doing this on purpose for a few minutes. Where am I looking right now? I'm looking down, and I've actually have my Zoom box way below my camera. And so can we talk about that and strategies related to the speaker view and how we can get that up? So I'm going to bring you back up. So I'm looking, at least I can look at you, which is not too far away from the camera. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about that and help us a
Absolutely.
little
Thank
bit
you
with that?
for talking about that. I think many people might know that they should be looking in their camera. And what's challenging about that is that it's a technically new habit that we've had to cultivate now that we're having meetings online. And it's counterintuitive. I want to look at where the human face is, and where the human face is, it might be way down here. If I have 20 people in the meeting and I have 20 squares and Joe is talking, Joe might be way down there. So if I want to be presenting and I'm looking at Joe, now the rest of the people don't have the experience of me sharing with them.
Yeah.
So what I've been using as a metaphor for this, where people typically are pretty skilled, is if you are driving in the car and you have a passenger, sometimes your eyes are on the road and sometimes your eyes are on the passenger. And so in the Zoom world, when I am the one who is speaking, I look at the passenger. So which means I look right into the camera where I'm pointing right now with my fingers. When you are speaking, I look at you. So much like in driving a car, if the road is over here, if you are speaking, I look at the road. When I am speaking, I look at the camera. So it's training ourselves to split our focus. I talk, in my case, it's a green dot. I talk, I look at the green dot. You talk, I look at you. And so that is the way then to leverage. You feel connected with me, and then I feel connected with you.
That's a really powerful practice, and one that I have been trying to be mindful of since our last conversation as well. Because what I'm doing now, and I'm again doing this on purpose, is that I've dragged you up so that your camera is not far away from my view of you. But there's a difference between me doing that and me actually looking in the camera, right? When I'm looking in the camera, it's a little bit more personal and it's a little bit more focused, right? So
I happen to have on my desk for a client that I was working with. So I'll share something that might seem silly, but is really powerful. She understood this whole thing. I have to look at the camera and I can't remember. And it feels weird. I get self-conscious. I'm looking at the dot. So I bought a package of these, 2 googly eyes. And I told her to stick the 2 googly eyes onto where her camera was on either side. So that you just look into the eyes. When you are looking, you look into the eyes. And then when you're looking at the person, you look at the other person. And so I've had 5 or 6 clients say that is a cheat that actually works really well.
That's great. That's great. What about there's some Zoom functionality that some people are not aware of around how they can use how they can change the default view or drag it so that the speaker's always in the center, or what do we need to know about that?
Okay, so if you have hidden self-view, you will not be able to do this. So you actually have to unhide self-view to take advantage of this.
Okay.
And this technique that I'm about to talk about is helpful when you have maybe more than 6 people on the call. So I'm often on calls with 20, 25, 30, 50 people. And if you want to be able to look toward the camera as much as possible, you can put yourself into gallery view and then move the mouse on top of your own video tile. When you move the mouse on top of your own video tile, you'll see a little white hand show up. And that little white hand means you can then move your mouse on top of anybody's video tile and drag their video tile anywhere on the screen you would like it to be. Where the helpful place to drag it is at the very top right under where the camera is, so that when they're speaking and you're looking at them, you're actually still looking close to where the camera is.
So if it's like a popcorn conversation where people are just bouncing back and forth, that may not be great. But in gallery view, when someone might be speaking for a minute or two at a time, so you're active, right, in this way that you're dragging and dropping and changing the speaker, and constantly then someone else speaks, you drag them up and you move them there. This increases the amount of work and energy and focus and attention, but it's a very effective technique. I know in our planning meeting that we started practicing this,
Yes.
our team, right? And it makes a difference, right? And so do you need to do it all the time? No, but is it something that's worth practicing? These are some of the little subtle things that can collectively, I think, change the extent to which people are engaged, as well as how we come across. I think
we also have a very skilled attendee, one of our viewers, a woman named Kathleen Pham. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Says pinning the speaker also helps.
Yep.
So you can move your mouse over the video tile of the person who is speaking. You go up to the up right-hand corner. There's 3 little dots at the drop-down. You can pin them or spotlight them. The other alternative is to go into the upper right-hand corner of the whole Zoom screen where it says view, and you can select speaker view, and then Zoom itself will pop a bigger image of the person that's speaker to cannibalize and take up more of the screen, so you can see more of them when they are actually speaking. So thank you for that, Kathleen.
That's great. And we had some great questions that were submitted ahead of time. If you have some questions, you can put them in the Q&A and also in the chat. We're trying to monitor. I think we have more than we can get to, but we've gotten to a number of them already.
Okay.
And I'll call some of them out in a minute. But if we can just take a minute and go back to the Zoom poll that we asked, or the Menti poll that we asked, which was the second question, which was,
let's see.
how do you mentally prepare to
look at this
start
amazing word
your
cloud.
work day? So let's all just take a look at this. We put this in a word cloud. Take a walk before, practice gratitude, make up and dress.
So I love that coffee is equally as large in the word cloud as meditate. I think that is a comment on modern living right there. And right next to it is prayer. I think that trifecta of coffee, meditate, and prayer, it's got you covered.
That's great. Just sit down and start. I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of that a lot of times because I need to get this done. I just need to get this done. How many of us do this? So I'd like us to chat a little bit about what preparing for a day might look like. And the way I want to engage and we want to hear from Carol is by talking about a related idea called a fake commute. I don't know if any of you have heard of this before.
Just recently, actually. Yeah, elaborate on that. I think people will be interested.
In the last few weeks, there has been what has been termed fake commute. I'd never seen that before. It actually comes from a growing literature that is a growing social scientific literature on how people prepare for their day and what kind of a difference that can make. And basically the upshot of it is that if you sit down for a moment and pause, and that may involve meditation, prayer, sort of some of these things that are routine, but also actually planning and thinking about how you want to show up that day and what you need to get done. So it's not just a to-do list. Let me make my to-do list. It's a pause for a few moments of how do I want to show up today? That significantly changes how you show up that day and how you feel like your day went, and often how your day went. Yeah. So in other words, it is a powerful predictor. And so oftentimes that switch between roles would happen in a commute, drive to the office,
yes,
drive somewhere. We now, for many folks on many days, we don't have that. And so we don't have that role separation, that time to move from one role to another. but we can recreate it with this idea of a fake commute, being intentional of how we plan for a day. How do actors think about this?
So I'm going to take the word commute and I'm going to replace it with the word ritual. That we had in the before times, what I refer to as the before times, before the pandemic hit and the way we had to show up at work changed into this showing up on the box all the time. We all had rituals, and different people had different rituals. Some people get up in the morning and turn on their coffee as the very first thing. Some people wake up in the morning and some people are still smoking and they have a cigarette as their very first thing. Some people have a ritual of getting in the car and driving to Starbucks and then driving to work. And all of that is the ritual, and it is the ritual that helped prepare us. So actors have built into the ritual, built into the performance, the ritual, because so in my normal life, my civilian life, before I get cast in the play or I go and I do my show, I'm Carol Lempert. I'm walking around, I'm doing my grocery shopping. I go to the gym, whatever I'm going to do. If I was going to be in a play when a play was happening. When you get to the theater, there's a requirement that you come a half an hour before showtime. Many actors come an hour before, but the requirement is a half an hour. So if curtain's at 8 o'clock, you must be there by 7:30. And the very first thing that you do when you enter the stage door is you sign in on a sheet that's posted that says, "Hi, I'm here." So much like a punch card, not because we're clocking our time to get paid, but to announce to everybody else, "I'm here. Don't worry, I won't miss the show." So that's the first piece of the ritual. I mentally say to myself, I'm here now. I'm about to go be the character I'm going to play in the show. I'm going to leave Carol Lempert outside, the civilian self outside. And then there's the whole ritual of warming up, and we do tongue twisters. We get our voice ready, and then we put our makeup on, and then we put our costume on. And each of those is a step closer to stepping into the role of the character that we are about to play when the curtain goes up at 8 o'clock. And so we all had those rituals. And if we haven't talked about what the substitutions of those rituals are going to be in the virtual world, that's partly why people are struggling. Those numbers of people who say that they're struggling more now or more in the middle than at the beginning could be the numbers of people that haven't figured out what the new rituals are going to be, which we could refer to as the virtual commute.
So maybe it's a challenge for us all, for everyone here on this webcast. And so some of you are already doing it, but I'd like to throw out a challenge that you be intentional. I'm going to do this, be purposely intentional for at least the rest of the week as an experiment to see what happens. I love this idea of, we talk about this all the time at the center in our programs and working with individuals and working with leaders and working with organizations, is that people don't think about their leadership and the way they show up and their presence and everything about leading, which also just involves being a human, as a practice and as a series of small experiments that we can conduct. So my challenge for you is, what small experiment can you conduct? And then just say, how did that work? Sometimes we don't do things because we feel like, oh, well, that I'm committing to doing this forever, or this. No, if you're skeptical about this, or even if you are already bought into this, I'd like you to just be intentional about starting your day a little bit differently and about thinking about what that role is. And it may not be, and we're not talking about half an hour, but how do you drop in and spend even 1 or 2 minutes getting mentally prepared for what your day might look like, and then see how it goes. You can ditch it if it doesn't work, but I think we should try it for those of you who are up for it.
I like that a lot. I have a colleague who has worked from home for many, 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 many years. He's a writer. So even before the pandemic, he worked at home because he's a writer. And his ritual of his virtual commute was to get dressed in the morning, have his coffee, eat his breakfast, leave his house, walk around the block, and re-enter his house.
Interesting.
And just by re-entering the house, it was now no longer his house, it was his workplace.
Interesting.
So he created that for himself, and a little bit of exercise as well. So journaling can be one of those things. Walking around your living room 4 times if it's cold outside can be one of those things. Physically leaving your house and coming back in can be one of those things.
And of course, we're acknowledging we're not naive to believe that you then have to be in that role all day, or that you aren't going to be called out of that role for childcare duties, or someone, a family you need to take care of, family member, or just other things, or something's really, you have repair people at your house, in a way. I think being intentional, there is some opportunity there for us to do a little bit better. If
That's a
I
good
can
challenge.
ask,
I like that challenge.
I think there's we got 2 questions ahead of time,
Okay.
both from folks working in industry in different companies, asking around what do the rules look like when it comes to owning the room and the Zoom around confidence and humor, and does that look different for women? What thoughts, or how have you experienced this, or what would you say to them? So what, and I'll read one of the questions. Just how can you balance using humor to engage a team but still have people take you seriously?
So humor is different than jokes. So I want to, and I say that because my husband is a comedian and an improviser. And so I have been dipped in the world of comedy and improv for 31 years in my relationship with my husband. So humor is different from jokes. And humor can come out of the situation that we're in, and in a work situation, as long as we are not making someone else the butt of the joke, either someone who is in the room or a particular category of people that is the butt of the joke. And I do think that humor is a tremendous icebreaker, especially if people are tense or exhausted. So if it's the 4 o'clock meeting on a Friday and we've all worked really hard and we're all really exhausted, humor can be part of that. And as it has to do with men versus women.
And confidence as well. So,
well, so I want to unpack confidence, because I think there's a difference between what looks like confidence and what feels like confidence. And often celebrities, if you check in with them, people who we think are successful and look imminently confident, will tell you inside, that they're still that scared little girl or that scared little boy, and they're hoping nobody's going to find them out, and they're walking around with imposter syndrome. So there are the signals, the behaviors that actors think about, and we think about these on a spectrum of high authority signals versus low authority signals. One of them we've just talked about in quite a lot of depth is eye contact. If I never look at the camera and I'm only ever looking at, many people have more than one monitor. So I've got my slides over here and I'm giving my presentation and I'm looking at my slides the entire time. I'm signaling to people they're not so important. So we've already talked about that quite a lot. So eye contact is one of those things that makes you look confident as well as connected with the actual viewer. Not fussing too much with the hair or the glasses, or men have beards and mustaches. This is very distracting. And on Zoom, it's in life, it can be distracting as well. On Zoom, it's even more distracting, because right now you are seeing from my chest up to the top of my head. So my face is taking up almost half of the viewing screen. If you saw me standing at the front of a teaching room at Florida International University, which years ago is where I was, you would see me standing as a full 3D human being. My face then is only 1/7 of what you see, because your head is 1/7 of the rest of the human body. So because it takes up more space on the screen, it's communicating a lot more information, and anything to do with touching it can be very distracting and diminishes your presence on the screen. Another one has to do with gestures. So never gesturing at all and being totally still the whole time. That can become very disengaging for the audience. It feels like a monotone tone of voice. A little bit of gesturing can be helpful. Be aware not to have it too much near the face, though, as well. And how you're sitting in your chair. So a lot of people have, I happen to be in a chair that is not built this way, but some people have chairs that you can pivot on. And if you're sitting with your legs crossed and one foot on the floor and one leg crossed over the other, and you got this swingy thing looking on, happening, you start to look either like you're impatient or nervous. So depending on who you are hierarchically, if you're hierarchically higher in the meeting and you are the boss, for example, people will read that behavior as impatience. If you are lower hierarchically in the organization, it could be read as nervousness. So those are the signals that we broadcast that show people what looks like confidence.
There's thank you for that. That's fantastic. There's one of my dear friends, Suzanne Peterson, who's at Thunderbird Graduate School of Management. She's a faculty member there, has a great article in Harvard Business Review that just came out a few months ago on balancing on confidence authority markers versus warmth markers, behavioral markers of the way to ask questions. I'm going to drop that in the, no, wait, let me see. I'm going to drop that in the chat here right now. Let me,
This way.
depending how you have it. For me, it's over one way. For folks, you probably don't need, if you haven't, you get 2 or 3 free articles. I would encourage you. I've used this with a number of people already, and they have found it to be very helpful. This article around confidence and warmth markers for those individuals who want to kind of balance and trying to find a way. There may be some golden nuggets in there for you. It's a fantastic article. I think it's going to become quickly become a classic, and there should be free access for many of you. Almost all of you should be able to get that free. If not, hit us up and we will find a way to get it to you. There have been a few questions come around, and also pre-questions around Zoom backgrounds. Do you have any thoughts?
Yes. I do have thoughts. So some of them are technical in nature, and some of them are depending on who your audience is and the requirements of your own organization. So early in the pandemic, one of my clients is a management consulting company, the name of which I won't mention because of the thing I'm about to say about it. Somebody in marketing decided that all of the management consultants should have a virtual background that has the logo and the branding of the company on every call whenever they are talking to clients. And so it looked uniform, but it also looked very commercial, like they were always trying to sell. Here's the name of my company. Here's the name of my company. Here's the name of my company. And several months later, they got feedback from their clients that said it felt gross. Please stop doing that. We already paid you. We already hired you. We know who you are. We would just like to get to know you. So if you're doing it for branding purposes, think really carefully about who the audience is and whether or not it's backfiring from a branding perspective. That's one piece.
That's interesting, because I think the default is always got to be, brand consistent and have, make it sanitized and make it not look, but sometimes the way that we're not only selling, but the way we're being much more effective is by being authentic. So having that dog run around in the background or something actually creates a bit of connection, that human connection that we don't get, right? So it's advantageous, right? And so letting people in, I hope this is one of our lessons, right? That for just in general about leaders and about organizations, is that we can't deny the fact that our bedroom is messy, or we've got there's sort of some of this, people have been so used to projecting an image, and that the way that people are not only the way that we get to know people and the way that we get to be seen as authentic is sometimes letting people in on those parts of our life that aren't perfect, right?
Exactly.
And so that's I hope that's a lesson we keep moving forward.
So there's another piece about the virtual background that I want to highlight, which is that there was some research done recently with an organization that I work with. 70% of the viewers, they don't like it. It's visually hard on your eyes when it's not executed well. And so in the room that I am in right now, which is my home office, behind me, I've got black file cabinets and I've got a black storage, but right here I have white blinds. So if I put up a virtual background right now, my actual background in my office will make that virtual background unstable, because there's white over here and there's black over here. And I've got this thing over here and there's all these little white little boxes over here. And so the virtual background is unstable, which means whenever I move a little bit forward or a little bit back, my face is going to come in and out of the background. So if you are going to do it, what you need to have behind you, and this is from Hollywood, this is from actors, is either a blue screen or a green screen. And so you can go on Amazon and search on green screen or blue screen. You can buy something that's called a wraparound, which actually attaches to the back of the chair, and it's like a little cocoon. So it's a green cocoon called a wraparound. I'm not getting any money from this. You can get any kind that you want, but you need a solid color background behind you so that the technology of how the virtual background is grabbing onto something solid so that you are differentiated from it. Now, also, I'm wearing a blue shirt right now. So if I invested in a blue background and I'm wearing a blue shirt, the virtual background would be all across my whole body. So what your clothing has to be differentiated from the background as well. So if the background is stable and you look good in it, then it's not so hard on the eyes. But to your point, I actually think it's nice to invite people into my world. Like, hello, welcome to my home. Nice to see you all. And I think that helps build relationship.
That's great. That's great. How do you and we're going to wrap up here in about 3 or 4 minutes. I want to get to a few more questions if we can here. And thank you again. Thank you to all of you who have been amazing in typing questions and coming in all kinds of various ways. So what do you do when someone isn't paying attention? And that might include or when you don't have feedback. Like, for example, now we can't see anyone. It's you and I, or if it's just you, or just how do we not only engage the audience, and what do we do? Is there a technique that we can use to not necessarily embarrass someone, but just to try and check their engagement? What would you
Yeah.
suggest?
So there's a couple of different things, and you've done several of them already to get our viewers engaged in what we're doing. This could have been a television show where you interviewed me and I talked to you and we talked to each other, but you had a Menti poll at the beginning. You showed the results later on. We've referenced the chat several times. So in this 45-minute period of time that we've spent together with these 247 people, you have put things in place because you thought ahead of time about what your goal of the meeting is to get a little bit of engagement with your viewers. So you've already demonstrated to us how a leader could do that at work. If you're leading a team and you've got 20 faces on the screen and you see someone or many someones are not paying attention, or their cameras are off so you don't know if they're paying attention or not, one of the ways that you can get some engagement is to pause in the middle of whatever it is that you're talking about and ask for engagement, but ask for it in a subtle, inviting kind of way. So, which could sound something like this. So I'm going to pause right now on what we've covered so far. I'm really curious about people's thoughts, their reactions, their comments, or their questions. Open up chat and everybody type into chat. And then afterward, I'd love to report in and let's ask Amy and then Stephen and then Kristen what you were thinking about. And then you can strategically insert the name of the person that you suspect wasn't paying attention to tell them that you know that they weren't paying attention without calling them out, and then draw them back into the meeting. So that's a facilitation technique that can be.
That's great. I learned something that's a little bit that's similar that I've used that's been very helpful. You can cold call on someone and say, well, what do you think about that? Right? You ask a question after you made a statement. There's a technique that can be very effective. It's called a warm call.
Oh, okay.
So a warm call is when you telegraph that you're about to ask a specific person a question, but you don't point to them after, maybe that they haven't been listening. So you might say, Carol, so what I want to come to you specifically on this issue, and I want to get your thoughts on this particular thing. And so if you weren't paying attention, I haven't put you on a ledge where I'm embarrassing you. Oh, were you not paying attention? Where I've given you an opportunity, I've woken you up, and I've made it so that you can then engage. And now it wouldn't work, of course, if you had your sound off, or if you missed that, but there's sort of nothing you can do about that. And it's a way that when you feel like you might get where you want to ensure that you're not trying to embarrass someone or put them on a ledge where they either pass or fail, where they're paying attention, sort of, to me, it's a little bit less personally threatening.
I love that. So
a warm call versus cold call. A cold call, just let me throw it on you.
Yeah.
You sort of warm it up and telegraph what you're about to ask them.
That's a great technique. I want to pick up the thread of something that you just talked about, because we've been spending a lot of time about owning the Zoom in terms of what people see, but there's also what do people hear. And so this is one of those things in the world of Zoom or Teams, when we're in these virtual environments. Often the participants in the meeting have themselves on mute, literally on mute. So psychologically, they are also on mute. They know that technologically they're on mute. So there is a barrier between me speaking. I don't just speak up automatically because I've got to, where's my mouse? Where's my thing? I got to move it over, it's a whole procedure to get myself able for you to hear me. You know, it's kind of like, what is the phrase of 2020 was, you are on mute. So again, back to the leader of the meeting, having good presence and owning the Zoom so that we don't embarrass anybody. So let's say George is the person that you're going to do the warm call to. So George, I want to come specifically to you to ask your perspective because you work in the customer service department. And my question is, and you insert your question, and then you add, so George, take yourself off mute and explicitly say to people, take yourself off mute, and then it reminds them that they should take themselves off mute. because, we're a year into this thing. Every time I discover I'm still on mute, I'm a tiny bit embarrassed by that. Like, oh,
Mhm.
sorry, I got it. Like, and as the person who's running the meeting, if you inject anybody with a touch of embarrassment, that's in your relationship now. You can't take that back. So really being explicit and announcing to people and say it again and again and again. So Amy, take yourself off mute, and Kristen, take yourself off mute,
Mhm.
and Nathan, take yourself off mute, and psychologically and actually. So that's another Zoom piece.
If I look at the time, I want to be mindful. I think we could go on easily for another hour, and maybe this is something we think about revisiting at another point in time. But I think that we have explored. I've learned a lot, and I've been
Oh,
trying to practice. And it takes conscious, deliberate practice over time. Trying to practice better looking at the camera and thinking through how I'm going to develop some of these strategies and practice them. I'm not going to get it right away, but how do I get a little bit better at it? Because even if we're going back to the office, this is a world that we're going to be in a lot more now. And so getting these things right is a way that we can increase engagement with our audience, with people who we lead, and can just help us be more effective. I thank you to everyone who's been here. If you can just please give Carol a big shout out in the chat and tell her thank you for being here.
thank
It is
you.
such a pleasure to always interact with you. And thank you all for being here. I'm Nathan Hiller. I'm the executive director at the Center for Leadership. I'm also a professor in the College of Business. And we've been having these webcasts every few weeks with fantastic folks, and there's more to come. Carol Lempert, amazing facilitator,
Thank you.
actor, coach, full of ideas. And we didn't even get to what one of the other things you and I are passionate about, which is how leaders can incorporate stories into being purposeful and constructing narratives for leading more effectively, that we separately work with. And sometimes we even tag team and go back to back in some of our programs, working with leaders on, which is a lot of fun. So there's plenty more ground to cover, but I want to thank each and every one of you for being here with the webcast, on the webcast today. And I want to thank our amazing guest, Carol. Until next time, wish you well, and hopefully you're all going to get your shots soon, and we're going to be coming out of the back end of this. Carol, thank you. Any final parting words?
Well, I'm seeing a whole bunch of love come in for you on the chat, so you should own that and take a bow yourself. Thank you both. Thank you, Nathan. And there was a couple of little questions that came in. So quickly, I will answer to Alice. She said, should you ask panelists to take themselves on mute during Q&A? And I'm going to say yes to Alice. So my final parting thought is thank you to all of the viewers for tuning in and spending 45 minutes with Nathan and I, because Nathan and I could just have a coffee and a chat without you here. And it was nice that you were all here.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Have a great week, everyone. Stay well.